Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Jordan Edits Your Photos. If you're new here, I will edit your photos on live stream if you email them to this email address right here, jordaneditsyourphotos@gmail.com. So tonight I actually do have a couple photos sent in by Monica Chavez, and so I selected two of the photos she sent. They're both of Lake Tahoe, and I'm throwing in a bonus photo that I took in Lake Tahoe this summer. So you'll see there are a couple different themes, winter versus summer, but yeah, gonna get right into it here. Oh wait, let's see. I have to turn off something. Hold on. I have the wrong window selected here. Let's see, Lightroom. Lightroom is broken up into all these different windows, so this might be difficult. How about I just share my screen and let's see here. All right. I think we're ready here. Let me do that. Sorry, it looks a little crazy. I'm just getting this sorted. Is this going to work? All right. Boom. Hope that looks good. All right, so this photo is taken by Monica. This is what looks to be Lake Tahoe in the background. Got some nice bright snow, and then the snow-covered trees around. Really nice photo. I'll leave the, I'll leave her name on the screen the whole time I'm editing her photo. All right. So something that happens a lot in like snowy wintertime photos is that the exposure gets kind of messed up from the bright snow and it sort of like underexposes a little bit. And you kind of end up with like gray snow. This one seems pretty close, but I am gonna bring the exposure up just a little bit. Just, obviously I don't want to lose details in the snow, but I also want to make sure that snow is nice and bright. Now, those of you that have tuned in the last couple of times may have noticed that I am using Lightroom Classic this time instead of Lightroom. I've had a couple issues with it and just kind of not super impressed. I was trying to like it. I wanted to like it. It has these really great syncing features where it syncs with the cloud and automatically backs up your photos, which would be great. And that part worked, but the actual editing interface just wasn't really cutting it for me, especially someone that's trying to go through multiple images at a time. So I decided to switch back to Lightroom Classic, see if the results are any better. Really quick before we go on, I just want to verify that this stream is working and that I am happy with it. So I'm just gonna pull it up on my phone quick here. Ooh, so that doesn't look good. That's not what I wanted. So please bear with me here. It's like super cropped. Oh, you know what I have to do? I have to fit to the screen here. There we go. That's what I wanted. Ah, perfect. Okay, let's get back into the edit. So the exposure, just bringing up the snow a little bit. Now this is a JPEG, not a RAW photo, so the latitude I have on sort of over or under exposing the image in Lightroom with the slider is going to be somewhat limited, but I think that's fine because we're starting from a really good place. So contrast, I think ultimately I do want to add some contrast to this, but I'm going to lower it just to start and kind of work our way back from there. So highlights, again, I want to make sure that snow is like a nice bright white without losing sort of detail in it. And I've mentioned this before, but if you hold down Alt or Option while dragging any of these sliders, you get this sort of reduced info display that lets you sort of focus on what is either over or underexposed. Same thing with shadows. I think in this case I like the detail it's bringing back. So I'm going to bump the shadows up just a little bit. The whites here, this is where I might actually go down just a little bit. Maybe not. Maybe I'll bump that up actually. I want to keep the snow bright white. That's kind of like the theme here, right? And then lastly, blacks. I'm going to crush the blacks a little bit. And that's going to give us some true blacks in the image and also bring back some contrast in the surrounding landscape. So already, just brightened up the image. That's what we've done so far. But there's a little bit more I want to do to it. So now that I've kind of gone through those settings, I'm going to go back to that contrast slider, sort of bring back some of the contrast. And I think that is a good place. So real quick, before, after, just really brightening up the image overall. Now, let's see. As far as the framing goes, I mean, obviously, it's really cool. You want to see the lake, but it does seem a little like kind of weighted heavy towards the left side with the subject and everything. So I want to, she's pointing at the sort of downtown resort area, it looks like, and kind of in here. And so I kind of want to draw the eye over there more rather than over here by the lake. And so to do that, I'm just going to crop it. So if we use the original framing, that would look something like that, which I think already is a big improvement. Something I always like to play with is switch the kind of format to like a vertical, see how that looks. Now, to me, I mean, especially if you're going to be posting on social media like Instagram, which really prefers a vertical format image, I think I might do this. Like, you know, obviously you're losing a little bit of the lake and the surrounding trees when you do it that way, but you're, you know, highlighting the subject. You still see that there's the lake in the background. You still see all the surrounding trees, the gray skies. I don't know. To me, I like this a little bit better. I think it just sort of like draws your eye in and really kind of focuses your attention. Whereas before, I feel like it's sort of like, well, where do I look? Do I look at the lake? Do I look at subject? Where? So I think it just sort of helps to focus a little bit. And then one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here to the paintbrush tool, and I'm going to dodge, which is lighten, and I'm just going to bring up the subject's face. This is Monica, by the way. Just sort of painting in to brighten up everything here, which I think will just help everything stand out. I'm going to brighten up the snowboard as well. You know, if this was a brand kind of photo for this brand of snowboards, they would kind of want this highlighted here. So bringing that up, I'm going to bring up the highlights a little bit as well as the shadows. Not too much like that, but something just ever so slightly like that. All right, now I think that is pretty good. Maybe warm her up just a tiny bit like that. All right, so I'm happy with that. Coming down to like the presence area or the effects. Texture, I mean, I could bring in some texture on the snow. Ultimately, I think that these are a little like over sharpened looking. I almost like to go like a little bit lower on the texture just to bring down the sort of overall sharpness of the image. I mean, it's still very sharp on the subject, but it sort of like makes it feel a little bit more organic to me. Vibrance is something I could play with to bring back some blue in the Tahoe area. I mean, you know, like keep Tahoe blue. I think that might be worthwhile doing. Not super thrilled on what it's doing to her pants though. So I might just come in here and go specifically in to the saturation and use the slider tool here to bring back saturation in the lake without bringing in so much in her pants. I know that it's similar color, so I can't really do one without the other. Maybe if I do that and then come back with the paintbrush here, do a new paintbrush on the pants, but this time, you know, instead of adjusting exposure, I'll turn that back down, but I will come down to the saturation slider and reduce that a little bit to kind of look a little bit more natural like that. Last thing I kind of want to do is add some drama to the clouds. So I'm going to use the gradient tool, and I'm going to just drag that down, hold down shift to make sure that stays horizontal and level. And then rather than brighten the clouds, I'm going to bring down the contrast a little bit, or sorry, not the contrast, but the exposure, and increase the contrast. Decrease it, it looks a little too flat compared to the brightness of the snow below, so I'm going to pop that up, just bring some life into those. Last thing I might do is just reduce the texture a little bit, maybe reduce the clarity a little bit, because we don't necessarily need like definition in the clouds, right? But something like that, and then I might dehaze them a little bit. I don't want to go crazy here, especially since it's a JPEG, but I think something like that looks nice. Just to show you what it looks like if I turn that on and off. It's just bringing in a little bit of drama to the clouds. All right, so to review here, we've got a before and an after. You know, just brightening up that image, taking the snow from this gray color to bright white as snow is, and bring into some color into the lake, the blue since it is Lake Tahoe, and then just brightening up the subject like that. I think that's looking pretty nice. All right, next image from Monica here with the little puppers. So this one again, I'm not gonna go changing the crop so much, but I do want to make this a little bit more about the subjects while still keeping in obviously the beautiful vista behind them. So I'm going to come up to my crop tool and I'm just going to bring this in slightly so it's more about them. I do like this like fluffy cloud at the top corner, but I think it's going to be worth it to miss that just to sort of bring them into focus. So sort of just centering them here in the frame, and then I did notice it's a little crooked, so I'm just going to come in there and straighten that out like that. All right, so now the horizon's straightened and kind of focusing on the subject, but still keeping a lot of that lake in the background. So very similar to before. Sometimes it's nice to hit the auto button, see what it thinks we should do. Don't really like that. I like, if you hit auto here, it's doing the same thing, kind of facing some of the same issues you would in camera, where it's sort of thinking like, well, that snow is pretty bright. I'm going to kind of tone down the snow, and you end up with sort of gray snow. So I'm just going to bump the exposure up there and just reduce the contrast ever so slightly. Let's see. Going to bring up the highlights. I don't want to lose all the detail in the snow, but something like that. Maybe just bring it down just a tiny bit like that. Yeah, I'll reset it. The shadows, just lift them like a little bit like that, and then everything else, I'll bring the whites up and the blacks just down a little bit like that. I think that's already looking pretty good. Just double check the exposure now that or the contrast now that I mess with everything else. I still think I like it just slightly lower contrast like that. So real quick, before, after, just really brightening up the image again. That's really all that's happening here. Just making it nice and bright. And then for this one, I do kind of want to play with the texture a little bit on the doggo. To do that, I'm going to use this paintbrush tool. Come over here, just quickly paint over the dog, and I'm not going to bump the exposure up on the dog, but I'm going to come down to texture, turn that up a little bit just to bring some definition to the fur, and some clarity. Actually, in this case, on animals, I think it does something nice. I think on people it doesn't do good things, but animals, yes. All right, I'm going to exit out of that and then come back to the overall image, and then texture on here. Again, I don't think it needs it. If anything, reduce it a little bit. I don't want to reduce the clarity though, because it kind of starts making things look a little hazy like that. Might add just a little bit of clarity, just add some punch to the image and the trees. Now dehaze sometimes can do good things, but I think in this case it doesn't really help out that much, so I'm just going to leave that. Then vibrance here, maybe just add a tiny bit. This one, kind of the opposite of the issues I had in the previous image. The sky and the lake are already nice and blue, so I don't really need to do anything to add color there. All right, so I think in this one, I want to, I don't know. I know that I just did this to the other one, but I think I want to do this again. I just going to add some drama to the sky. I'm going to drop down a gradient and kind of reduce the exposure ever so slightly, but bring up the contrast, and then, you know, saturation, I think I want to bring it down ever so slightly because I want to sort of draw the eye to the subject, which is nice and bright and colorful. And, you know, I think I'm going to actually go through and just paint over the snowboard a little bit just to brighten that up. Increase saturation on that graphic. And maybe just brighten up the subjects here as well. Something like that. Maybe lower the contrast a little bit on the dog and Monica. Something like that. I think that looks pretty good. Maybe I'll come down to my effects and add some grain. If you've tuned in the past, I love sort of these vintagey vibes, and I'll add some grain to sort of just make the image not so digitally sharp. This looks like it may have come from a phone just because everything is like so like sharpened. And so by adding a little kind of rough grain, something like that, it just sort of takes those, you know, digital edges off and kind of makes it nice and organic feeling. All right, so real quick, before, after, before, after. I think that looks pretty good. I'm going to come back up here and just, if you highlight over this little triangle in the upper right hand corner here, it shows you everything that's overexposed. I am going to bring down the whites until I at least get the dog not overexposed. So I think that is better. Something like that. So really quick, before, after, before, after. I think that adds some nice dynamics to the image. One more thing before I'm done with this. I'm going to go back to that gradient and bring back some saturation to the sky. It's looking a little gray. Something like that. All right, I think I'm happy with that. Now, moving on, this last image is one I took. I just need to reset this crop here and come back into OBS and get rid of the tag here. All right. So this is one I took last summer up at Lake Tahoe. Kind of this this beach. I don't really want to say the name of it because there was no one there, and it's on a beautiful day in Lake Tahoe. That's kind of rare to find no one there. So I'm just gonna say it's a beach at Lake Tahoe. So first thing I'm gonna do, I'm gonna come through, hit auto on the horizon there. I just noticed it was a little crooked before. Sometimes auto can look like overcompensating sometimes, and then I'll have to come back and adjust. Another tool you can use to straighten your horizon is this little level thing where you can click and drag along what is supposed to be the horizon and let it use that as a guide. But all right, I think that is looking better. All right, so this image, to me, I mean, so keep in mind this is a iPhone image, so like there's a ton of sharpening going on with these leaves and trees and the edges of the rocks, and it just like, it's like too sharp and it's too like bright and contrasty. This almost has the opposite problem we had with Monica's photos. So I need to kind of reduce everything. I'm just gonna see what this thinks for auto. It's just boosting the shadows and giving it that like HDR look, which I do not like, so I'm just gonna reset that. So for this, I'm immediately just gonna turn on the contrast, like a lot, something like that. And then I'm gonna come into my highlights, bring those down a little bit, something like that. The shadows, that looks gross to me. That's that like HDR look that just was really overdone like 10 years ago and is slowly dying out, but I still see it every once in a while and I vomit inside my mouth whenever I do. So I'm going to lower that, not all the way, but something more reasonable like that. And you're still getting a little detail in the shadows on the rocks, but it's not like fake. Lastly, add a little bit of contrast back by upping the white, and then just make sure there's like a little true black in there by doing that. So next, texture. This is a good example of like too much texture to begin with, so I'm going to take that back. I'm just going to take the clarity. No, that looks like a comic book if I do that. I'm going to leave that alone. Dehaze. You know, sometimes dehaze does cool things, sometimes it doesn't. And this one, I really actually like what it's doing with the sky, so I'm going to just add a little there. Dehaze tool is supposed to remove atmospheric haze, and in this case you can clearly tell from the hills in the distance that there's a haze in front of them. So dialing that up a little bit just brings some contrast back to the sky. So for this one, I'm going to come down here to my tone curve, and I just, it's a little too punchy. So I'm going to sort of play around with this a little bit, see if I like it a little better. So I guess what I'm doing is bringing back contrast, which kind of works. It's kind of got this like crushed shadow thing that was super trendy a few years ago. Trying to minimize that. So something like that I think works well. I'm going to come down here to my detail. And, you know, here I just really want to, like, as much as I can, get rid of all this like crunchy sharpening. Like, I need to like reduce the sharpening, not add it. So that's maybe not what I want to do, but I think I'm going to take a similar approach that I did with the last image with the film grain. So by adding some grain here, I feel like I'm breaking up the sort of digital artifacty nature of the, so yeah, especially the size. If I make the size of the grain like something like that, that really helps to sort of like blur the edges and make it not look so, you know, crazy. I'm gonna reduce the amount of grain just a little bit, but I think something like that looks pretty good. And, you know, a lot of this grain will not even really be perceivable once you get down to like the size that it would be on a phone, like something like that. Like if you're watching this right now in the live stream, you're not really seeing the grain, but what you are seeing is not, you know, this lack of overly sharpened leaves. So, you know, I think this is pretty good. Debating if I like these sort of dead branches up in the foreground, in the upper left. I'm just curious what this auto patch tool, I don't know what it's called in Lightroom, what it looks like if I try to draw out. Oh, that's not going to work. You know, I think I'm just going to leave those in. I could take this into Photoshop if I wanted to and get rid of those, but I think that's a task for another day. I do want to add just something more. Something just isn't quite sitting right with me on this image, so I'm just going to try to add some character to it. Maybe adding a little green in the shadows. Maybe warming up the midtones a little bit. Something like that. This was kind of golden hour. I don't think I'm going to mess with the highlights at all. I might come up here and just do a global, like, overall warming of the scene too. Something like that. As I do that, the sky kind of becomes an odd color, so I am actually going to come through here and adjust the hue of the sky a little bit. You know, I don't want it purple. I don't necessarily want it teal either. And then I'm going to actually just dial up the saturation a little bit on the sky. Something like that. I dial back the saturation on these trees. And the yellow of these tree branches right here, you know, this must have been taken in the fall time. It just like looks a little muddy. So I'm just going to brighten the luminance value up. And that's going to brighten the beach up as well. And now that I've done that, I feel like it's a little too bright, so I'm just going to bring down the the white point just a little bit. Maybe not the white point, because that kind of messes with the sky, but maybe the overall exposure, something like that. Some might say it's slightly underexposed, but I think that looks good. So let's just do a quick before and after. So before, super punchy, bright, contrasty, colorful. Now a bit more muted and not so sharp. You know, it could almost convince me that that was taken on some film, something like that. So I'm just adjusting the horizon a little bit more. It just felt crooked to me. All right, so that I think is what I'm going to go with for my final edit. So just to recap here, I'm going to go back through the 3 images. So looking at the first one, I've got a before and after, brightened everything up, brought some life into the colors. The next one, before, after, kind of the same idea here, just brightening it up a little bit, adding some contrast in. And this last one kind of going completely different directions, starting with a really bright, colorful, contrast image and going to more muted colors and more of a faded look. All right, so I hope you enjoyed watching this tonight. Let me just switch back to my camera here. So if you did like this, I'm doing these every night now, about a half-hour live stream every single night. So if you send your photos to jordaneditsyourphotos, that's the email address right there. Just send me a couple photos and I'll pick a couple of them and edit them on the live stream. And you know, I'll put your name up there and your Instagram handle too, so that, you know, make sure, oh, I guess I should say, be sure to include your Instagram handle in the email so I know who to give credit to for the photo. And yeah, so that's it for tonight. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, hit that thumbs up button. If you just happened across this video and you're not already a subscriber, definitely subscribe, because there's going to be more content like this coming up soon. So again, thanks for tuning in, and I will